It had hair all over its body other than the face itself.
There are, in fact, 4 different types of, what we think of as Sasquatch or Bigfoot.
Very wide, pronounced nose. There was also a very ominous odor.
Phase 1 is to identify opportunities. I walked into a small clearing in less than 10-15 feet away from this enormous creature, and it scared the living hell out of me. Phase 2 is conducting investigations both of witnesses and locations. The size of the thing, it was 4 or 5 feet across the shoulders. Phase 3 is profiling research areas, what's there, how they move, feeding, things like that. About 8 feet tall, I guessed around 800 pounds. It was massive. I had no idea that anything like that existed. Phase 4 is create an intercept plan. I decided to shoot in the air to see if maybe it would scare it off. Phase 5 is the intercept and resolve the issue phase. It didn't do anything, didn't react, and then I heard a noise from my right rear, and from out behind some brush come another one and walked over by the first one. That's when I decided to do what the dog did. I took off running. Welcome to Witness of the Unknown. Hello everyone. Speaking with Brian today. This is our weekly chat. Brian, how you doing, buddy?
Doing good. How about you?
I'm good. Off work, so I'm relaxing and chatting with you. Yeah. So I'm doing very good now. So you're just starting to tell me about an article you came across.
Yeah, it comes from, I think it was The Sun. It just, I don't know, for whatever reason, it just came out the other day, but it was about these chimps that are okay. The story was that someone like New York City blood organization or something like that wanted to do tests on chimps, and this goes back to the 70s even. And so they were trying to find vaccines for diseases and everything. But after a while, they started to become contagious with their diseases. Mm-hmm. And I guess even the Humane Society got involved in this and paid money for them to, instead of killing them, to actually take them down to some islands in Liberia. Mm-hmm. And today it's known as Monkey Island or whatever. And they say that these chimps are like 4 times stronger than men. I don't know if that's the way most chimps are anyways, but
actually it is. When I took my anthropology courses eons ago, that's one of the things they did discuss, that chimps are 4 times the strength, or as strong as 4 6-foot tall men.
Yeah. And they say that there are about 50 or 60 of them, and they're on a kind of a small island though. And I guess because they're on such a small island and they're also afraid to swim, that what happens, supposedly, according to this article, that they have no way of getting food or water, or at least food. So what happens is they have people that will come out to them each day and give them food. And so I guess the chimps know those people. But a lot of tourists now are trying to go out there, and people are warning them that, no, you want to stay away. If they don't know you, they'll kill you and eat you, maybe.
And so, I think I actually saw a YouTube video about that island, and that's true. They have signs posted all around it. Don't get on the island.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. But I got it off the Drudge Report. If anyone's listening and wants to go back, it's probably from yesterday or the day before, I think.
Yeah, I think people don't understand that all primates can actually be quite violent.
Right.
So
yeah, especially
So
Yeah.
we're talking about our favorite primate. It's not really a surprise. It's the same kind of behavior you see across the board with primates.
Yeah, I can imagine for sure. And actually, this kind of is a good segue to a question, which is that might be an example of territorial disputes. But what I was curious to know is that in all your research, did you ever come across any stories or any evidence of the creatures themselves getting into territorial disputes, maybe with themselves?
Between each other, you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I've actually heard quite a few. One in particular was kind of interesting. I don't remember the particulars offhand. It was an interview I did, I don't know, probably 6, 7 years ago, but where the witnesses, there were several, they actually heard one group encounter another group, and apparently it was fairly noisy, the exchange between individuals of each group until apparently the dominant alpha between the two groups roared, and then all the chattering and noises ceased, and apparently the two groups, went their ways peacefully. But that's not unusual either. I mean, that happens also with other large primates.
Yeah, yeah, with family groups and things. Yeah.
Yeah, there's usually a lot of displays and things like that. And I've actually seen videos of that with chimps, where, there's this encounter, and then, the alpha will kind of step in and stop all the bickering, and then it's done. The issue's settled.
Right, right. Um, I'm actually reading more of your book, and I gotta say, the research that you do is really impressive. And I was gonna ask, where did you get all those articles from those newspapers? Like, because you have a lot of them going back to the 1800s.
Well, it kind of started years ago. There was a man by the name of Dennis Gates, and he was a researcher from Cedar Woolley, Washington, and he hung out with Rene DeHinden quite a bit. And in fact, when I met DeHinden, they were in his Dennis Gates vehicle. So Dennis, he had health issues, and he was a Korean War veteran, so some of his health issues, I'm sure, stemmed from, his tour of combat, but he created a clipping service. And I had some articles, but when I was doing the work for Knott's Berry Farm in 1988, I went to visit DeHinden and John Green and talked to Grover Krantz. I bought things from all of them. Renee told me that, and I believe at this time Dennis Gates had already passed away, but he had bought out his clipping service, all the things that he had. And Dennis was really good at collecting these things. And I remember I purchased for, I think, $20 this big stack. It was like, 2 or 3 inches thick of newspaper articles. And then, of course, I would pick them up here and there. I'd go to, local newspapers in the Columbia River Gorge. It's where I met Roy Kraft, and who ran the Skamania County Pioneer back in the 60s, when they created the ordinance against killing a Bigfoot there. But
Right.
so I would just go through, and I knew of other references to articles, so I would go online and look them up, and just it's a lot of footwork. Sometimes if you know of an article and roughly where it came from, you can contact local libraries. And
Right.
the trick there is knowing what term that the library puts the articles under.
Right.
For example, one was monsters mythical. Well, I had no idea. I wrote them and I said, well, I'm looking for Bigfoot articles. And they responded back, well, we don't have any Bigfoot articles. And
Yeah.
I had to kind of think, okay, how would they put them in there? But the articles were out there. It just requires a lot of work to dig them up.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine it's probably a lot easier nowadays with the internet rather than the old days where you have to go like through stacks of,
And it depends on the facility that has them, because, and here's an example, some places I could contact online, and the person I contacted, they would refer me to the person in charge of that, and if they had them on microfiche or whatever other means, or sometimes just in books, they'd have to go look them up and scan them and or copy them and send me a copy. But I've gone to newspapers and other organizations, and they just had. And I'll give you. This is a good example. This County Pioneer. When I went there, I went with a couple of my team members at the time, and they pointed to this closet, and it was awful. There was these. I mean, it was probably 3 feet thick, of just, and it wasn't even organized. It was like they just threw these articles in there, and I had to go digging through to find what I wanted. So it's kind of a crapshoot, looking these things up. Sometimes they're organized, sometimes they're not. It just depends on, who's in control of those things.
Yeah, but the articles that you cite in there are really, really interesting. And of course, as you say, they had different names for it. And I think there was one that was Gazebo or something like that. They called it like an Indian.
There was, the word Bigfoot was coined, I think, in, I want to say it was 1958. And that was, another newspaper in Eureka who was really great. I mean, they were awesome. I contacted them, and they sent me everything they had from, that time forward. But that's when the term was coined, with Jerry Crew was out with Betty Allen. She was the person who wrote articles periodically for the newspaper locally there in Eureka. And he just made the comment, and they were looking at tracks on one of these trips, and he says, that fellow sure has big feet. And she coined the term Bigfoot in one of the articles, and the name stuck.
Right.
So before that, they were just whatever the locals called them in different places.
Right. And there was going to be I was going to ask you something else about that too, but I forgot.
And it's still like that in some locations. I've talked to people, especially in the South and the East Coast, and oftentimes locals will refer to them by names that were passed down for generations instead of Bigfoot or something like that.
Right, like I think in the South they call it a booger, and
that's one of the generalized terms. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, you say it best at the end of that chapter too, which is that the documentation for the evidence, the publication, I guess, of the evidence goes back to the 1820s. But who's to say that it didn't go back way further than that?
Yeah, I'm sure it did. It's just a matter of finding those documents. I think the oldest article was 1811, and that was in a. I can't think of the term of the type of publication it was in, but, off the top of my head. But I really, after publishing Notes from the Field, I years later I thought, geez, I could have done several volumes of that one book because there was so much material. But, when you write a book, you have to keep it at a certain length so that the reader doesn't get bored. You want to keep their interest moving. And but I could have done, and I've thought about it, especially like a book on just articles. Just to kind of provide things for people if they really want to take a look at that stuff.
Yeah, in that chapter, those pictures, I forget offhand the names. Shipton, right? Those pictures of the footprints, and the other one, Zebo, I think his name was.
I misspoke when we talked about this at one point. Eric Shipton's nephew. I think I said his son, and that was incorrect. It was his nephew, who I was able to contact him, and he was a very nice guy, and he gave me permission to use those pictures, and he said, he was very happy that someone was still interested in what his uncle, had taken pictures of and wanted to use them.
Yeah, because those pictures are really, really amazing, because you can clearly see that there's only one set of tracks. So in the snow too. So it would be hard to do a hoax try to recreate, and they're so far apart too.
And I would think that the location and everything would have been not necessarily impossible, but who's going to drag things up in the Himalayan mountains to those heights just to for a hoax? I mean, that's just kind of silly.
Yeah. And when you do find tracks, even in your own experience, do you usually find just one set of tracks, or do you find multiple sets of tracks right by each other?
It depends. Sometimes you'll find a pair of tracks, like there's two of them walking along. Oftentimes one singular individual, sometimes three or more.
Yeah.
It all depends on the circumstances.
Yeah, yeah. About footprints and things like that. One thing, and I guess maybe this is a naive question, maybe you would know better to answer it, but there are many people out there. I mean, obviously Jeff Meldrum comes to mind, but I mean, who analyze thousands of casts, and I just wonder, the people that do those casts, do they also take a lot of pictures as proof? Like, in other words, like, I don't understand the emphasis all the time on people doing casts.
It's,
I mean,
well, for casts, you have the actual foot, so you can take the cast back and do a little better study of the foot. And also, the idiosyncrasies from one foot to the next, individuals, helps you identify individuals because no two set of feet are the same.
Yeah.
But, that's a good question. There were people, I remember, like Bob Titmus and some of those folks who did a lot of that work. They did take some pictures, but I think their emphasis was more on bringing castings back and not so much the pictures. DeHinden took pictures of footprints, but he didn't cast, which I thought was interesting. I'm not sure why he didn't. He never really explained himself on that, but Rene didn't have many footprint casts. I mean, literally only like a few.
Right.
And he just didn't seem to put much stock in it. And again, I don't know why. But then you have Bob Titmus, who did a lot of casting.
Yeah. Hey, by chance, do they have a lot of handprints out there?
That's something I've been looking into a lot and asking people for. My latest book, Bigfoot Evidence, I did get some pictures from a number of people. And handprints are fairly rare, but they do occur. I have one set of pictures, and I miswrote it in the book. There were 3 pictures from a guy in the Midwest, and his brother happened to be a crime scene investigator for a large metropolitan police force. And I won't say which one, to protect his brother's privacy, but it's a fairly large city in the Midwest. So, anyway, the gentleman who sent me the pictures said they were up in this place, or he was up in this place, and he fell asleep in his truck. And in the morning, he found these prints on the glass. One's a handprint, and he said the other one was a nose smudge. And they're pretty clear. And his brother actually came out and prepared the prints professionally to lift them, and then, but it rained before he was actually able to lift the prints. But the pictures are interesting. And of course, we have other people. I had a Native American gentleman in northern Nevada. Him and his kids were up in a very remote area, just playing or whatever up there. Had the kids up there, and they came across a bunch of footprints, snap trees, and some handprints in this soil. And he sent me pictures. Actually, his mother sent me the stuff, and then I was able to talk to him. But so they are out there. And then, of course, the first ones anybody saw was from a man by the name of Ivan Marks in northeastern Washington. He was with the guy that was with Rene DeHinden when they found the Bossberg cripple footprints. But Marks later became a hoaxer, and we talked about that before. But I think initially, he was pretty, legitimate in the things he found, and then once you find a bunch of stuff and then you don't find anything more, some people, in fact, a lot of people get addicted to that attention, and then they think they have the need to go out and fake things to continue that attention. But but he had cast a couple of handprints, and I have a copy of one of them, and it's pretty interesting. But there are handprints, not a great deal of them. I've heard of other people, tell me about casts they had seen of handprints. I know at Klamath Falls Indian Reservation, the head of the cultural committee told me that for a long time in Klamath Falls, there were some handprints that had been cast by firefighters, forest firefighters, and they were on display a long time, and then they disappeared. They don't know if somebody threw them out or what happened, but they do occur occasionally.
Yeah. I guess going back to my previous question though about why aren't there more pictures of the footprints is because I guess the best thing is to do both, to get castings and to take the pictures. But I mean,
right,
those pictures, you can clearly see that it's a trail and it goes off and it's a straight line and everything. So it seems that it would be really, really good evidence to have that as well.
Absolutely.
So that it's,
and that's what I would.
not just,
that's what I do.
Yeah.
Before I cast, I want to take as many pictures as possible from different angles, and that's something Renee taught me. Different lighting, things like that, and then cast some of the prints, and then they have to be numbered, so you know where they were in the line of prints and all of that stuff. There's a lot of work to it.
I never thought of that. That's a good point about numbering them.
Well, you need to count them, and what I do is like where I find the first one I find, I'll count forward from that. That'll be like print 0, and then I'll count forward, and then a plus number, however many prints I find, and then a minus number backwards, leading to that spot. I mean, because what you want to do, and this goes back, I guess, to my archaeology training. You want to be able to recreate in a lab what you have out on a site, in as perfect detail as possible. That has scientific value. So I was fortunate, being trained in archaeology and actually worked on a couple of digs. So I have the skills to be able to do that and do all the measurements and everything and document it so that it can be. Somebody in the future might be able to take that information, recreate it, and get something valuable out of it. But, at this point, it's important to do that.
Yeah. When you do find the footprints, I always wondered, why are they always in a straight line? How they go like down one line. Like it doesn't.
You mean
what I'm saying?
Where the toes aren't pointed out like we are in herringbone fashion?
Yes.
It's because the Sasquatch's mechanical structure is different than ours.
Right, but it just seems odd to look at those pictures. I mean, but it's true with every set of tracks that they find. All the photos indicate that they all kind of walk like that.
Yeah, when I see pictures of a line of tracks and they're anything but that,
right.
the red flags go up right away because that's been a hallmark of Sasquatch prints for many, many years.
Yeah. I guess that might be related to somehow, how they don't bend their knees. I'm sorry, they don't straighten their legs.
Correct, yeah.
Their knees are always bent. But
yeah, the knees stay slightly bent all the time, but yeah, it's just their overall mechanical structure is very different than ours, so they don't walk like a human. Actually, they're better adapted at bipedal walking than we are.
Yeah. Kind of going back to your early days, and I'm just thinking about going back to In Search of the Unknown. But when you were growing up, when you found those tracks in the snow, and you and your friends went out there and started looking for this thing, what was your guys' intention? Were you guys trying to just find one just out of curiosity, was
I think back in that sometimes, and I was talking to my buddy John. I went up to visit friends and family on my birthday last March, and John and I and my other buddy Milo, we were all having lunch together, and we were talking about that, and I said, we were all laughing. I said, we really didn't know what the heck we were doing back then. We go charging off into the brush looking around, and I think we probably just wanted to see, firsthand what it was making those prints. I guess, I don't know what we thought was going to happen if we'd encountered one or more of them, but, back in those days, I guess we had more guts than brains. We didn't really plan a whole bunch. We just went out and wanted to see.
Yeah.
But
if you did,
we were
would you
kids.
would you shoot at it?
I think a lot of times we weren't even carrying guns when we went out looking. We had machetes to get through the brush that was thick sometimes, and that was kind of it.
Yeah. Did any of your other friends? I know that we've talked in the old days with I forget the name of the site, but with a couple of those people or at least one person that was in that book when you were growing up. What was his name?
Probably Milo.
Yeah, Milo.
Yeah.
Did any of them ever continue with you to search for the creature, or do more research, or was it just kind of you that stayed with it?
It was pretty much just me. The other guys, once we graduated high school, and most of us, I think all of our group of friends but one went in the military, so everybody just sort of went their own ways. I mean, we've stayed in touch all these years, most of us, but and it's interesting, again, when John and I were talking, he was telling me about not long after, we saw those prints, that at night something big was getting in their trash cans, a bunch, and they were all afraid to go out and look and see what it was, but there weren't any bear around. I mean, we would have seen tracks and sign of bear, and there really weren't any bear around that area. So that kind of narrows it down as to what would have been getting in the trash cans. But I told him, I said, you never told me that. We had a good laugh about that too. But it's funny, things you talk to your friends about, and then, 40 some years later, you hear something new that you didn't know was going on way back then.
Yeah. And speaking of that, did you ever talk from maybe people that you hadn't talked to for a long time when you were growing up, or just anyone from your area that you found out later on had some similar experiences, or that anything new that came up later, maybe people that you knew that you maybe didn't know that well growing up, but that maybe you saw later?
Actually, quite a few of them. And it's funny how you run across people, because there's so many more people in that region now than there was when I was growing up. But there was, I did a 4-part interview with Rebecca, and she and I went to the same high school. She was a few years ahead of me, so I didn't really know her. I knew of her, but I didn't know her. So we got talking. She had quite a series of experiences in a different group than the ones we were experiencing, but not that many miles apart. And there were, I had a girlfriend years ago, actually, when I was just beginning to do research for Notes from the Field, and her daughter was friends with someone with a family that lived in Puyallup, and come to find out, this individual, when he was a kid, and a couple of his friends, in the place where John Green and Renee Dahan had their camp set up where the Puyallup Screamer stuff was going on, were out playing in the woods one day, and one of these things actually came through the brush towards the kids, close up, and scared the hell out of them. So actually that story's in Notes from the Field too, so the interview is. So it was interesting, and periodically I'll come across somebody from that area that had some kind of an encounter. Dwayne, I interviewed him out where we had the Clark Ranch experience, and he saw one of these creatures, encountered one out there during the same time period. So it's interesting all these years later that periodically somebody will pop up and we'll get connected and come to find out, this picture has taken all these years to emerge of things that were going on there.
Yeah, well, I imagine that back then it was probably a taboo subject to talk about.
Oh yeah.
But nowadays it's more well known. I think that everybody kind of knows about.
But still,
at least.
But still, it's kind of it's tough to drag information out of people. I know of other people I've been told had encounters in that area that still won't talk about it. They won't talk to me about it.
Wow.
I've asked and no response.
Wow. And it's kind of funny. How close were you to Mount St. Helens
Well, St. Helens is about 125 miles south of where I lived. I live close to Mount Rainier.
Oh, okay, okay. It was just kind of interesting because I saw a YouTube video of when that blew up. Like that was amazing to see.
Oh, I had a ringside seat the day it blew.
Oh yeah,
I think I told you before I was in the Army then. I was stationed at Fort Lewis. I was a squad leader with in the recon platoon for Delta Troop 35 Cav. It was near Cav unit, and it was kind of a rude awakening when I came back from Germany. That was my first duty assignment. I came back after being with an armored cavalry unit for 2 years, and in armored cavalry, your boots don't hardly ever get dirty because you're on the vehicle. In fact, a lot of times the vehicle commander would make you take your boots off so you wouldn't track any dirt in it. So I was used to, not carrying anything, and all the stuff was right there, and people would bring us food and all that good stuff. And when I came to Fort Lewis, this guy, young private, drove me up in a Jeep to the unit, and there was a bunch of guys marching, and they had backpacks on. And he says, "That's your platoon, Sarge." And I thought, oh crap, they're sticking me in an infantry unit. But anyway, fast forwarding to Mount St. Helens, we were in Yakima, had been in Yakima for a couple of weeks in the field. And it was really my first experience living in a foxhole, which was basically just a hole in the dirt with a couple other guys. And everybody was filthy and miserable and cold. And I got the word to pack everybody up and load up on the helicopters. We're heading back to Fort Lewis. So I'm thinking, I just want to get home and get showered. So we took off. I had my squad took 2 helicopters, 2 Hueys, and we took off, and we were heading west. And as we approached the mountains, it looked like there was cloud cover, a lot of cloud cover. And I'm thinking, oh gosh, it's raining. And I'm thinking, geez, it's going to take twice as long to get everything cleaned up so I can go home. And all this stuff's going through my mind. I'm calculating all this stuff. And one of the pilots, he came across my headset. The squad leader would sit. The 2 pilots were in the front, and then we were slightly behind them, not very much. And there was a jump seat there between them. So I could talk to them, and kind of direct where we were going, things like that in the field. But one of the pilots, he come across, he says, "Hey, Sarge, you know what that is ahead of us?" And I said, "Misery." he knew what I meant, Yeah. He says, "No, that's St. Helens." We kind of knew stuff was going on because the military had to, would keep an eye on that kind of stuff. But we didn't think much about it, being we were quite a ways away. And it had blown that morning. We got out of Yakima just in time because that was the ash cloud coming east. And if you saw the pictures, how it was like nighttime at noon in Yakima. And we'd gotten out of there just before that hit, so they rerouted us north around Mount Rainier. But when it blew a couple more times later that summer, and you could see it from my parents' house. We took pictures from there. It looked like an atomic blast had gone off from that distance.
Yeah, yeah. And there was always that rumor that after that the government somehow captured one of these creatures, but
it didn't happen. And you and I've talked about this. The guy in Portland who concocted this story, and it was just that. It was concocted. I mean, there was no, and it was because he and I were talking, and I had mentioned about my, at that time, let me think. Yes, at that time I had already gone through my archaeology training and everything when I knew him. Yeah. And so I guess that triggered something in his brain. Well, this guy was really good at concocting stories. And one of them was that, if the mountain blew, there must be bones. And, the problem with that, when the mountain blew, especially on the north side, number one, all the game animals pretty much bugged out of the country. Animals are perceptive. They can kind of tell when something's going on like that. So, and anything that was killed was buried under 100 feet of ash.
Right.
So if there was anything, it's not ever going to be found because it's buried. And now that area is, the forest grew back very quickly after all that blew. So there's just no way. Because I was a key member in my unit, knew dozens of pilots who were flying all over that area, and they would have told me if anything like that would have happened. Even if they were told to keep it confidential,
Yeah.
so there's always chit chat, and I would have been told.
Yeah. In general, when you talk to witnesses like that or guys like that, I guess, like, what percentage would you say that they're lying, and how do you tell?
Of witnesses or people like that who make things up?
Well, I guess maybe both.
Well, I listen to them and I watch their body language and just kind of their approach. And I think to myself, what are they trying to get out of this if they're telling me?
Motive and
yeah, exactly. I mean, if they want attention, then there's a red flag to that.
yeah.
Now, lately, I've been getting a lot of witnesses who just want to get it off their chest. To me, that's legitimacy. They're trying to get it off their chest, and it is very therapeutic. The guy I mentioned that I talked to just a couple days ago, he didn't want, he wanted to be anonymous for both him and his location, which, absolutely, I don't think people need to know anybody's business or name and stuff like that. They don't, I just don't want people's lives to be intruded on. It's more interesting to know what happened, and all the different aspects of that. And it's therapeutic. And that's one thing he said. It was very therapeutic to talk about it, to get it off his chest, to talk about, and especially talk to somebody who had an experience with these things. So if I can help people that way, then absolutely, that's a big plus. But you listen to people, and you also have to kind of pick out, try to understand what their frame of reference is. They might add things in from things they heard on television or elsewhere and it may not be the exact thing that happens. So you have to really get to the bottom of that and dig down a little bit.
Yeah, and I think you also mentioned I can't remember which book, but I think it was In Search of the Unknown. No, it couldn't have been that one. But anyways, I remember you saying one time too that whenever a witness changes their story, that's a huge red flag.
It is, absolutely. Yeah, that's one thing I learned from Dehinnon and John Green, especially Dehinnon, because, lots of people still like to, promote the Albert Ostman story. The guy that claims he was packed off in a sleeping bag by a Sasquatch and was forced to be with a group of them for however long it was. Number one, that kind of a thing has never been told or repeated anywhere else. And secondly, Renee, kept in touch with the guy for a couple of decades, until he passed away. And I believe he was the original interviewer of him. So he stayed in contact, and he said over the years the guy's story would change all the time and dramatically. So, when there are facts about something, and I funny, Julie and I we watch all these Dateline shows. And you hear things sometimes that are very interesting, that are useful, the police work, that they use in police work. So one of the things a detective made a comment about was in cases where, a person actually experienced the details they relate to us, over time, those things don't change. But a made-up story will change because the person forgets the intricacies of the story they made up in the first place.
Yeah. I used to watch a show, I guess I still do sometimes, but it was called Forensic Files.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, and a lot of times, well, in addition to the forensics, though, but the police would interview somebody, and then there were maybe little details that would change throughout, and that was one of the things that led them to find more evidence and then do forensic tests. And yeah, that's a major red flag when a witness will change their story and everything.
Absolutely. I mean, I've of course have come across people over the years that I didn't know it at first, but eventually did know that they fabricated their story. But when I first talked to them, you can tell sometimes there's just little things that are wrong. Especially for me, because I have heard and read so many of these accounts. I mean, I couldn't even begin to tell you many thousands of them. And the legitimate ones, which are the bulk of them, are always have the same particulars to them. And I can tell usually within a few seconds somebody tells me what happened to them, and I know it's legitimate because I've heard the same thing from other people, totally unrelated, different time periods, that were the same details.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about this a lot of times, but in the old days, you deliberately kept details that only you knew about, or you and Renee would know about.
Yeah, that's what the old timers did.
Yeah, yeah. And that's smart. That's smart.
Even to this day, there are things I won't say, trying to gauge the authenticity of a story.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, I wanted to ask you too about vocalizations. What are you, well, first of all, is that one of the main things that you're interested in, getting vocalizations on tape?
It is. It is. They fascinate me because it's all part of the whole behavior spectrum. But vocals to me are very interesting, and they can be analyzed in pretty good detail, unlike other forms of evidence.
Yeah. And, the stories that I've heard about vocalization, and actually the audio that I've heard of vocalizations, it is weird because they all end with a high pitch to it, almost like they say a woman screaming.
Oftentimes. Now, I've heard other types of vocals that weren't like that at all. The best one I've ever heard, and I think I say best because it was close, and it was definitely one of those underwear changing moments because, and I can't remember what year it was. It must have been 2002 time period. I had a girlfriend who, her and I, we took her teenage kids with us camping, and we cooked our dinner, and it was a little camp area. There was only 7 spots along this particular river, and on the other fork, which was divided by this huge rock and timbered ridge, all very old growth. I mean, that area's never been logged because it's inside of a park, actually. So in the Olympic Mountains of Washington, we decided to go for a little walk. There was a ranger station that's rarely used. They keep it closed most of the time, but when they're up there, they'll stay there for a week or so. And then I don't know what the purpose of that is, but anyway, we decided to walk up there to see if anybody was there. Kind of an after dinner walk, and it was right at dusk. There was still light, but it wasn't. Interestingly, it was about the same time of day that I had my first encounter back in 1974. Where light wasn't great, but you could see. And we were coming back to the camp, and this thing, and I had a recorder in my shirt pocket, and this thing cut loose with a scream that was super loud. I mean, on the verge of to the point of hurting your ears. It was that loud. And it just reverberated down through the canyon. And then we could hear, but unfortunately I only did it once because I grabbed my recorder and I was ready to push the button, for any other vocals, and nothing. It just did it one time. But it was this long, loud, I don't know, I guess it would have been what people call a roar. Because it wasn't really a scream. I can't even compare it to anything. I've never heard any other animal make any noise anywhere near like that. But you could hear everybody down, the other campsites, and dogs and barking and stuff. And it was only about, I don't know, in elevation, maybe 100 feet or so above us on this rocky ridge. But it was, and I've heard lots of vocals over the years, but that was probably the most impressive one. Like I said, just because I think of the proximity. It was so loud. We heard a lot in Yacolt, but not with they didn't have the force. I mean, now they were loud, but they didn't have, I think, just the sheer force that this one did.
Right. Are there different types of vocalizations depending on geography? maybe the types too, the type 1s through
I,
4s.
I think that's possible. I haven't really got enough data to look at that yet because there's so much to this. I mean, I get focused in a lot of different areas, but that's an interesting point. It'd be nice to know. Um, e- um,
Because
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, oh, I was just going to say that because down here in Florida, I haven't, at least the stories that I've heard about, I haven't, and when I say heard about, I don't mean talk to anybody, but I mean
Hmm.
that I've read about. I don't read a lot about vocalizations down here, but then again, that might also be because these creatures, a lot of them at least, are known as skunk apes, and they supposedly it's swamp apes too.
Right.
So they maybe are in water a lot too, and maybe they just are obviously different types than the ones that you might get up in Washington and Northern California and
Oh,
stuff. So
absolutely. Right.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, it'd be interesting to find out. Um, and again, vocals are something we don't have a great deal of. There are some out there, um, and then just being able to distinguish,
Yeah.
Sasquatch from normal animals. Don in Maine has done a really good job. He's working on that, with the spectrum, the graph that he has. He runs the vocals through and everything, and you can really tell lung size with those vocals. So Don's doing a great job with that in his area. It'd be nice to be able to apply more of that, and get more vocals recorded, so we can really start getting a better picture of that.
Yeah, I was going to say, because with modern technology, there are a lot of things you can do with audio that, for example, you could determine, well, was that a male or female, for instance? Was that a juvenile?
And
Um,
even back in the 70s, I don't remember whose book it was in, but they had talked about vocals that were recorded, and they were able to analyze those and tell the lung capacity of the
mhm.
individual that made that sound, and it was much larger than any known animal. So I always thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I wonder why they do it in the first place. I mean, is it just to scare the hell out of the forest?
Well, there's a variety of reasons. I mean, it could be territorial, could be signaling to other members of a group, could be, challenging other groups, in territorial disputes, things like that. Could be warnings, could be, I mean, there's just, the list goes on and on about the reasons they might do vocals and the different kinds of vocals.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's very
And I,
interesting.
and I wonder if they, well, I'm sure they communicate in a variety of ways, not just with vocals, but I mean,
Absolutely.
even with stick, stick pounds and things like that. Like I heard a story one time where one of them was nearby a deer, and then a one from a different area alerted the other one with a stick or something such as that, and so I mean, they obviously communicate in a lot of ways. So
Yeah, I hear you, man.
yeah,
And that's just the thing. It's like the guy I was telling you about I talked to a couple days ago. Um, he's on the podcast on the premium show. He didn't actually see one of these things, but he wasn't prone to believing in them either. The area he lives in Oregon, and the guy's a combat vet, multiple times in combat. Um, we talked before we recorded, so I know the guy's background somewhat, so um, he's not prone to making up stories and things like that. But what he did encounter spooked him and his buddy that was also a combat vet. And then what they heard was they did hear some vocals, and then they heard, he said, what sounded like something had picked up two fairly large rocks and slammed them together 3 times
yeah,
as soon as they
yeah,
left this one particular location. Now, I don't know. There isn't anything else I know of that's going to be able to do that in the wild. So, um,
yeah.
you could assume, it's speculation, but you can assume that it was a Sasquatch. Then you have to think, well, why would it do something like that? And I said, well, that was probably in response to your presence there, to other individuals that were nearby, some kind of a warning. And he described the location, and it could have been they were in an ambush situation because there was a herd of elk in close proximity. So, rather than do a vocal that might have spooked the elk and spoiled the hunt, a noise like hitting rocks together, might have been a signal that wouldn't alert the elk herd to their presence. So, there's a level of intelligence there that would certainly indicate that.
Yeah. Do you ever get a lot of questions from people who are just curious about the subject but never experienced one?
Oh yeah. Quite a few actually.
Like me, basically.
I would love to start doing. In fact, we've talked about doing that live call-in shows. I always enjoy that and letting people ask questions and trying my best to answer them. But
because I was just about to say, in the other shows that you've done, at least one, you basically essentially just interviewed witnesses, which was good. I mean, that's a good format for a show too. But to have like live callers come call in, that would be good too.
Listeners enjoy that. They want to be involved, and they and I like talking to them. I have known other show hosts who didn't like that at all, and I could never quite. I mean, well, at the time I couldn't understand it, but then I think, oh well, those people didn't know very much about the subject, so that's why it was difficult for them. They didn't know, weren't up to the standard of answering those questions. Where I think I do okay in answering questions.
Yeah, because I think that would be a very good format if we could pull it off. I don't know how. I'm sure there's a way to do it. So.
Yeah, it just depends on the platform we use.
Yeah.
But it is something we're talking about doing. We are planning on doing it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even with I'm not sure how to do it with Skype, but I'm sure there probably is a way, another format. Or another format. That's
I'm sure there are plenty of formats to use. We just have to decide on one and start working with it. But I know having done them in the past, I really enjoyed talking to people, and listeners enjoyed that. So it's definitely something I'm interested in doing.
Yeah, for sure. Because I come up with a lot of questions each week, but I'm sure
you do.
People, but I'm sure other people listening out there could think of things that I can't think of right off the top of my head.
And I'll tell you, one of the things I wanted to do, because I'm already thinking about writing another book. I've sort of got the itch, so I'm not sure what I want to do, but I think it would be interesting, and I would love to have people contact me with questions. It would be nice to have a lot of questions in a book and then put the answers in there for people, because a lot of people like, I remember in the military they said there's no such thing as a stupid question, and there really isn't, because unless you're just being stupid, but we get people trolling that do things like that today, but most people have pretty good questions, and maybe they're afraid to ask them, but other people, usually if one person has a question, other people have the same questions. So I definitely would encourage people to, contact me and ask those questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe I can put something together like that, and put that out for people.
Yeah, maybe you call it the definitive book on Sasquatch or something like that.
Something, yeah. I've got a few more books in me, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Any more questions come to mind, or?
Not tonight. I think we're about out of time. It's been about an hour, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we're getting pretty close. Well, we can go ahead and wrap it up. We'll just do it again next week.
Yeah, sounds good.
Brian, you always have the best questions, and people enjoy listening to what you have to say and bring up. So I definitely appreciate you doing this every week now.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, buddy. Well, listen, you have a good night, and we will chat again next week.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, Brian.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye now. Thanks, everyone, for joining me this week. Be sure to tune in again next week as we explore another account from a witness of the unknown.